Up next on Inside the SCCA, talking about NOLA and the Super Tour and some other stories. Up next on Inside the SCCA, talking about NOLA and the Super... Welcome to Inside the SCCA. I'm Brian Bielanski, and we are here talking about, we're 3 days before SCCA returns to NOLA for the Super Tour, and I have a great guest tonight. We've been trying to do this for a while. Denny Stripling is here. Hello there, sir. How are you?
Good evening, Brian. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. So we talked back last year at Hallett. You were reveling in the with a flag and a trophy, and you would just
probably reveling. I believe that. Yeah.
And having a good old time. And I caught you. I said, "Hey, we got to get you on the podcast." Yeah, great, sure. Then I find out you're a busy guy. You're a hard guy. I mean, I am shocked, honestly, as you know, that I got the Casanova to be able to stop for Valentine's Day.
I was going to say, the one night I'm not busy, bro. No. No, my wife is like, do your thing, man. Have fun with it. She's totally cool, which I'm not shocked by that fact. So, yeah.
And funny, because my wife is not big on the racing thing. We have found a way to peacefully coexist. I do my racing stuff. She does her stuff. Mm-hmm. But when she found out I was going to New Orleans, she was like, "Oh, this might be one I want to go to." And I'm like, "Oh, you're welcome to come." So
that is an attention getter every time. Yep.
So the funny part is she's coming Sunday after it's over.
Oh, really? And that looks like the day we're gonna have the best weather, so that's good. Sunday's looking like the nicest day.
Yeah. So she's flying in Sunday afternoon, and then we're gonna spend a couple of days doing New Orleans. And
that's great. Have you guys done New Orleans yet or not? Is it new or?
Leslie has spent a lot of time there. Not a lot of time, a bit of time. I have not. So, and I'm a saxophone and clarinet player, so we've got some jazz clubs we're going to go to. And if anybody knows me, I probably will enjoy some beignets, and some chicory. But so we're going to spend 3 days, and then we fly back on Thursday. I do laundry. I pick up my kid, and we go right to Buttonwillow for the next Super Tour.
That's just a hop, skip, and a jump.
Yeah. So
you could have set us up for 45-minute podcast just to dork out on clarinet, saxophone, music, stuff. I was this close to being a French horn performance major going into college. I consider myself a well-rounded dork, is the way I describe it. So
nothing wrong with that.
No, we could certainly converse on that front. Yep.
Band people rock. So
yes, my daughter was. I was one of those guys. My daughter was in the marching band. She went to University of Oklahoma. Was in the Pride of Oklahoma.
Nice.
And dude, I was one of the guys that was fired up for the marching band shows. One of those guys.
Very cool.
Proud to admit it.
Very cool. So welcome to the show. 2-time podium finisher at the runoffs in Spec Racer Ford.
You had to bring it up.
Of course I did. Of course I did. And like I said, we were going to have you on after Hallett, and then you got busy and I got busy. So I figured the next best time to do it would be either before Hallett or before New Orleans, before NOLA. And you said, yes, I've driven NOLA. So I'm like, let's get you on. So we're going to talk about that. But we start every show with every first-time guest the same way. And the question is this: how did you get mixed up in this crazy sport that we love?
All right. How much time you got, Brian?
As much as you want to take up.
It's a pretty cool story. I will try to be reasonably not verbose with it, which anyone out there that has met me knows that is non-verbosity. Non-verbosity is not a strength of mine, if that's a nice double negative. So, I grew up down here in the Dallas Metroplex. My dad was an orthopedic surgeon, very much a type A personality, but I love my dad. He loves me. We were very close, but we're very different people. He watched racing when he was younger. I didn't watch race cars at all, knew nothing about it, thought cars were cool growing up, but just was never into racing at all. And then, so my dad and I had very differing ideas of what was fun. He would go and do surgery and then get home and work really hard and go upstairs and then do all of his numbers and paperwork and then go to bed. That's a day for him. For me, I went to school, came home, went out, hung out with my buddies, threw a baseball, rode my bike. I was always out doing stuff, and my dad was always an indoor guy. So we never found a thing that just resonated for the two of us.
Sure.
We were very close, father, son. It was great, but there was never that kind of that textbook story of father and son have found their thing. We didn't just both love baseball or something like that, right? Well, I went to undergrad at Baylor in Waco, and then before I went to graduate school, again, well rounded dork. I have a very interesting graduate degree that I don't use today. But before I went to graduate school, my dad called and said, "Hey, son, before you go to grad school, as a kind of congratulations gift before you go to grad school, how about we hop in the car that I had at the time and we drive out to Phoenix and we go to this Bob Bondurant driving school."
Very
and
nice.
Like, I don't know what a Bondurant is. Is the guy's name Bob? I mean, I know how to drive. He's like, no, it's race cars. I'm like, oh, yeah, that sounds relatively badass. I don't know what I'm doing, but let's go try this thing. So we made a trip out of it. My dad and I did. And it was cool. We drove all the way out there. We did Carlsbad Caverns on the way back. I mean, it was a neat adventure. But when we got to Bondurant, we also chose to do it in Phoenix in July.
Great idea.
Right? So, but it was cool. That was the first time I'd seen the little misters and all that stuff. And, we started at like 7 a.m. We're done by 2:30 or 3. And back then, they had the Mustangs, right? They had the Mustangs and Formula Fords. When you did we've never been in a race car school with them for 3 days.
Right.
And we got in the Mustangs, and I was reasonably quick. It was me and my dad, another guy and his dad, and the guy that was there was a professional motocross driver. And then there were two other gentlemen, I think, in our class. So we got in the Mustangs, and the kid that was a motocross guy was the fastest guy in the Mustangs. He did very well, and I learned it quickly. But I was like, hey, I'm having a good time. He was a professional racer, and they all said, yeah, watch what this guy's doing. Well, then they put us in the Formula Fords, and I went out, promptly spun the thing, poked a hole in the nose of it, and then said, oh, okay, maybe I better rein this thing back in. And within, 30 or 45 minutes, they would send the instructors out in one of the instructor cars.
Sure.
And they would follow you. You were in Formula Fords tuned down, but they would follow you in what the time was like a Taurus SHO. Remember that bad boy?
Oh, yeah. Yamaha motor.
Yeah, Yep. It was a Q ship is what they used to call it back in the day. Nobody knew that it was fast, but it was.
Right.
These guys would get out there and they would run all over the back of you and try to show you where to go when you were in the Formula Fords. Well, they came out, started chasing me, and then they got peeled off. I found out later, he said, I can't keep up with him, which wasn't a thing that was unheard of. It had happened before, but it didn't happen that often. Well,
sure.
I reined it in, got very quick in the Formula Fords, and when we were done, I looked at my dad and I said, well, that was incredibly fun. I cannot believe how much I enjoyed doing that. Feel like I did reasonably well. I'm sorry I spun off and spent a couple $100 on fiberglass on the nose early on, but I had an absolute blast. And the instructors came over and said, well, you actually did really well. I said, great. I don't know what that means. And my instructor said, and I still remember this day, he said, well, Denny, I've been doing this for like 15 years. And he said, of all the people that have come through here that had zero experience, I think you're the fastest guy that I've ever seen. I was like, all right, well, that's a small pool, but I'll take it.
Yeah.
that's very cool.
How long ago was that?
That would have been, you're really going to make me answer. That would have been 1993, my friend.
Okay.
So that was 30 years, just over 30 years ago, many moons ago. So
nice.
So I went back, thought nothing of it. Everything's cool. I enjoyed it, but I just thought it was a really incredible experience. And I didn't kill myself at it and was reasonably competent. All right, this is a good time. So my dad, who I haven't mentioned as well, was an ultra safety guy. I was not allowed growing up. I couldn't jump on trampolines.
Whoa.
I couldn't go to water parks.
Because your dad's an orthopedic surgeon, right?
Exactly. My dad's a surgeon.
Sure.
He said, I played all sports, but he wouldn't let me play goalie in soccer. He wouldn't let me play catcher in baseball because he saw too many broken arms and wrists and stuff. And I was like, so he's a very safety conscious guy. So I get back, I go to grad school. My dad calls me like 3 weeks later and he goes, we're going to go do this SCCA thing. And we're going to go rent a car and go do a thing. Fine. So we rent a Formula V.
Okay.
So at the time I was 6'1". I was probably 20 pounds heavier than I am now. So I was probably 6'1", 230, 235, something like that. So I poured myself into a Formula V.
Shoehorn and Crisco?
Exactly. Yeah. I learned yoga and then, exactly. Shoehorned in, got in this thing, went out, ran, had a good time. Whole story behind that. I can tell you another time. It literally is too long, but we had a good time with it down at the old Cabanis Air Force Base, Naval Air Station, Cabanis Naval Air Station in Corpus, right? This was many moons ago. I'm really dating myself here. So my dad and I had a fun time doing it. I actually won the race on Sunday against some national level guys and thought it was very cool. And again, we went away, no big deal. That was in January of '94. My dad calls me like 3 weeks later and he says, I'm going to rent this thing called a spec racer. I'm like, let me know how it goes, Dad, whatever. So he goes off and rents a spec racer and says he has a blast. He runs it at Texas World Speedway back in when they were Renaults.
Yep.
And then he calls me like a month after that and he goes, son, I bought a race car. And I was like, you did what? With a what? And he said, I bought a race car. And I was like, wait a second. Okay, who are you and what have you done with my father? And then he said the following statement. He goes, and we're going to build it.
Oh,
and I was like, dude.
You bought a car in a box.
Yeah. Neither one of us knows the business end of a screwdriver, and our life is going to be, it's dependent on this thing. I'm like, yeah, this is a recipe for disaster. So into '94, I'm driving from Waco to Dallas, about an hour and 45 minutes.
Sure.
Come home. wrench on Saturday, wrench on Sunday.
Yeah.
This thing goes here. Nope, that's upside down. Nope, I'll call somebody. That goes over here. Build this spec racer, which was a Ford at the time. This was during the Renault Ford transition. And we got one of the first spec racer Fords. And if this is a spec racer Ford audience, I have a really, really interesting story to tell about that. But this is a broader audience than that. So if you're a spec racer Ford driver, find me in the paddock and ask me about my original spec racer Ford motor.
Okay.
And I'll tell you that story. If we have time, I'll tell it, but it's a good story. So my dad and I built this car from scratch, literally. When we put it on the trailer, we'd never set it up. We just bolted it together. I'm telling you, Brian, we put it on the trailer. This thing was like had -3 inches of rake and all angled. Steering wheel toe was out of whack. We didn't know. So we took it to Abilene, which was a flat airport track. My dad took it out and raced it the first time, I think, April of that year. And he spun like 7 times in the first race. I mean, it was like, I think he got dizzy and nearly threw up. He spun so many times. Turns out it was had the car all set up wrong. But we were like, well, we jumped in some deep waters here. And then, so this is what got me into it. Then I made it to, I went to Hallett for my first ever race. Another gentleman that I raced is Johnny Marigi. He was there for his first ever race.
Okay.
He's a venerable guy, been around doing this a long time.
Absolutely.
As well, super nice guy. Johnny and I showed up. We put X's on our cars. I didn't know what that meant. Somebody goes, "You need an X on your car." I'm like, "Is that because I'm cool?"
Nope.
It's because you're a no driving idiot. Okay, give me an X. So, but the thing that's the most memorable thing about the whole story of my first ever race, I went and raced at Hallett, raced on Saturday. Then I woke up Sunday morning to go do, it was a regional national race. And I woke up Sunday morning to go to the national race and walked out, and they had the little newspaper thing. You pull the newspapers out Sunday morning, like 7 o'clock in the morning. And the newspaper thing says Ayrton Senna dies in a race crash.
Oh,
and
wow.
And I was like, who's Ayrton Senna? I'm not lying.
Yeah.
I asked my dad who Ayrton Senna was. That's how not race savvy I was.
Yeah.
So my first race weekend was the race weekend that we lost all those guys at Imola. Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So it was, but that'll forever be burned in my brain now that obviously I'm very, very intimately familiar with Ayrton Senna. So the long and short of it was my dad just randomly said, "Let's go do this thing." Yeah. And we found a shared passion. And then he and I shared a car. Then we bought a second car so we could go drive different races and get our license up. And then he drove all the way through 2003, 2004, and then finally hung up the boots. But I mean, we found the shared passion that we've never had. And it wasn't until I was 23 years old. So, and it was all about SCCA and road racing.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I'll date myself with you. Mm-hmm. My first ever time in a race car was in a sports Renault.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. My dad bought chassis 224 or 425. I don't remember which one it is. Right. And I've told the story many times, so I won't tell it again. But so yeah, I go way back. I in the Wayback Machine as well. And ours was built when we bought it, but it was a school car from Dorsey Schrader, and we didn't. Awesome. Yeah, and you know what? Any school car gets the crap beat out of it. And it was the motor was very, very damaged and very, very slow. But when we got it fixed, it was great, and we had a lot of fun with that car for a couple of years. So, and Bob Botterant, by the way, I don't know if you ever met Bob, but for those of you who are Bob Botterant fans, I don't think I have the video up on the YouTube channel, but on the podcast channel, if you do a search for Bondurant and Inside the SCCA, I think we put an episode up there with him. I spoke to him, interviewed him somewhat at length at the Rolex 24 a couple of years before he passed away. So, really nice guy. And to talk about a storyteller, boy, he knows everybody, was part of everything, and great stuff. So,
that's incredible. He had a great school. It was really great.
Yep. And I now have several friends who've been instructors at Bondurant too. So over the years, so yeah, they do a really nice job there. And
the coolest thing that they do, just like maybe the most memorable thing, even for a guy now that has raced. I mean, I've been fortunate to race a bunch of stuff, right? A bunch of places with a bunch of success. I've done a ton of racing in my career, and it's still, I will never forget being at Bondurant and being in the cage car.
Okay.
The car that was the Mustang that they could jack up all 4 corners of it. They had like a roll, kind of a cage around it, and the guy had a pneumatic or a hydraulic thing on it that he could jack up the front and the rear of the car. Oh, freaking amazing! And
cool.
He would do so. And the quick story there was my dad was crammed in the back of this Mustang, right, with a roll cage and everything in it. And they put us out on the little thing, and I was doing very well. The guy would put it into understeer, and then you'd have to adjust for understeer, and then he'd put it into oversteer, you'd have to adjust for the oversteer, and my dad was spinning like he was spun a lot. Right. So I never spun the car. I didn't spin it. And then the instructor, he wasn't getting frustrated. He was having a good time. Like, he even told me, he was laughing. He was like, "I'm having a good time with this." And then he said, "Okay, this time, instead of doing like 45, I want you to do 55. I want you at that current. I want you to turn. I want you to turn to the left." You go, "Fine. I got this one on." throw whatever you got at me, bro. So I went down this thing, hit like 55, turn left, and did like 18 360s. And the guy is giggling his ass off the whole way. My dad in the back's going, huh? Huh? I mean, he's getting totally ill. So we got done, and I was like, dude, did something break? And he goes, no. Right before you got there, I lifted the rear tires off the ground.
Nice.
I turned in, and I was like, oh, you jackwagon. But anyway, it was great. So that was the kind of the end of the Bondurant story. You mentioned how worn out your spec racer was.
Oh, yeah.
Spec racer. Yeah, I don't want to make this too spec racery, but
that's okay.
It blows people's minds when they hear what we're racing out there. And and my car, I'm fortunate, my car runs, at or near the front of the pack pretty often. The car I'm running, and they're older cars than mine, but I'm running chassis 098. And
wow.
We're well into the 900s now.
So
098.
For those who don't know, car 098 was bought at the first runoffs that it was introduced at before it was even a class. They pre-sold, I believe, the first 100 cars.
I think that's right.
On that weekend.
My estimate was it's either a 1984 or a 1985 chassis.
Right.
It is still that chassis. That's the same chassis that I'm running right now. Okay?
Yeah.
And it was even crazier. There was, I want to say 6 cars. There might have been 8 cars, but there were 6 cars. We'll go with 6. That sometime in the late 90s, and somebody out there knows the details. Somebody either like 99 or 2000, 2001, somebody said, I'm going to buy 6 Spec Racer, at the time, Ford Gen 2s.
Right.
They put them on a ship and they shipped them to Dubai.
Oh.
Okay. And they put these big ugly wings on them and they beat the ever-loving hell out of them for like 5 or 6 years. Sand, heat.
Yeah.
They just let guys run out and they just tore them up. This is one of those cars.
Yeah. Yeah.
I go to my garage right now and I pull rivets out of the frame rail. Fine grained sand still comes out of the thing, which is probably cheating because it's movable ballast, right? But I mean, there's still this like Middle Eastern sand in the chassis of the car, and that car still runs right up there with the best of them. Yep. I mean, it's incredible how resilient, these things are. It's nuts.
And I don't know how quickly they get tired these days with the Ford motors, but I know when we had the thing rebuilt. To get rid of all of the bent rods and bent valves that were in it when we got it. We ran 34 races on that motor without a refresh before we sold to the next person. And the car was still finishing in the top 5 every race weekend, pretty much, with those motors. So, the reliability is crazy. I know that the new Sadiv is even more reliable than the old H boxes. So it's not inexpensive to get in, but once you get in, there are a few race cars out there that you can race over and over and over again without having to do a ton. Change the oil, put new brake pads on, put on new tires when you have to, and you might not run up front after a while, but you can still have a ton of fun for a long time without doing a whole lot.
Yep, and you can beat them within an inch of their life. You don't have to go out there and take it easy like some other cars. They're not thoroughbred racehorses in the sense that you have to be careful with them, right? Yep. They're borderline tanks. I will give you a perfect example. So the new 1.6 liter Ford Sigma motors that we're running, they came out originally in 2015. That was when the Gen 3 version came out. Mike Davies, who's our tech guy, basically this is Mike Davies' Frankenstein machine. He built this. It's his labor of love. It's an awesome car. I think these are like 73 or 7,500 RPM street motors. We're 6,750 rev limiters. So he built them with a tolerance so that the motors will last forever. We had, I don't want to call it a rash, but we had more than a handful of motors fail in 2023. And what we all were beginning to decide is it looks like it's about 8 years you can get out of a motor with doing nothing to them. Think about that.
Yeah.
8 years. And that's without sending them in for a relatively inexpensive refresh. And just having the rod bearings change, right? So it's amazing. Yeah.
When you say 8 years, how many races per year would that have been, just as a guesstimate?
I mean, at least, I would say most cars, weekends, we'll say weekends. I bet most cars are doing at least 6 weekends. 6 to 8 weekends a year. Some are doing more than that.
So we're talking 12, 16 races times 8 years.
Test days, and test days are a full weekend.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So, we're talking, anyway, again, I don't want to make this too spec racery, and I'm obviously a big fan of the class. I'm a shill for the class, but they are really, really fun. And now the fact that they have a 6-speed sequential transmission, it's a video game, Brian. It's nuts.
It's crazy, and we've talked about this before on another podcast. Spec Racer Ford and its predecessor, the Sports Renault, in many respects saved the SCCA. Car counts were down. There were regions that were having a hard time putting on races and not breaking and breaking even. The Spec Sports Renault came out, and all of a sudden you were getting 25 cars, 20 cars, even at regional races with them, and that bore out of that the Spec Miata, which is our highest subscribed class now, and now the next iteration is SMX5, which I think is going to be every bit as popular as Spec Miata at some point in time. And the concept of, before that, everybody's like, you don't want all the cars to be the same, but the racing. There are a subset of people who don't want to build cars. You didn't know the front or back end of a screwdriver, you said, and you built your own damn Spec Racer, Sports Renault. It probably had issues and needed some help, but it was a car that anybody could get into and learn to run, and without those Spec series that we have now, and the start of it all was Sports Renault, I think the SCCA would look very, very different today. So, so it's okay to talk a lot about Spec Racer Ford because of its importance to the club, and it has allowed all of the people who don't want to race that kind of stuff to keep having a place to play, because we have a lot of races out there where there are 5-10 cars out on a regional weekend in a whole race group, and you do a bunch of races with 5 or 10 cars, and your region's going to run out of money. So when you have a couple of races that have 25 or 30 cars, that makes it work. So. Okay.
Yeah, and we're all big fans of SCCA. All of us love SCCA. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
Yeah, but we have on more than one occasion, even regardless of whether or not we've been drinking, joke about the fact that look, SCCA is riding in Spec Miata and Spec Racer's backpack. It really has been for the past several years, and that's not a knock. You got to have a cash cow.
Yep.
And Spec Racer's a cash cow because of the class that it is and the racing that it provides. SMX5 and Spec Miata are spectacular, and I'm here to tell you, it's all because of Mazda.
Yep.
I mean,
no
Mazda. Love those guys and ladies. What Mazda does for grassroots motorsports is untouched by anybody else. I would love to say, yeah, Honda's coming and Toyota's got it. No, ain't nobody got anything on Mazda. So I don't, unfortunately, get to race a Mazda. I would love to race a Mazda just because I would like to support Mazda. That's how passionate I am about their passion for the sport. So, I mean, there have been some tipping points in the SCCA's not distant past, right, where things like Mazda supporting Spec Miata, and then now SMX5, and then Spec Racer being, available as well. They've been game changers and allowed us to make it through some nasty, macroeconomic headwinds and COVID stuff. I mean, we had Spec Racer guys coming out of the woodwork because they had cabin fever during COVID. It's crazy how many Spec Racers we had, and other classes shut down. People didn't come out, right? And that could be related to the demographic of who races those classes. I mean, there's a lot of things involved, but I mean, Mazda with Spec Miata and SMX5 and Spec Racer have really been a boon for SCCA over the past several years, actually longer than that.
I've been a Honda guy for years. When we got out of Spec Renault, Sports Renault, we went to IT Hondas, ITC Civic, ITB, CRX, and even now today we have 2 Hondas in the garage. And the Honda that I built in 1994, and then the other one we bought in 96, and what I've got in my garage right now are very much the same car. Yes, there's some computer stuff. Yes, there's some electronics and stuff, but I could probably take the car up in my garage apart down to its frame and put it back together without opening a manual. That's how much they're still the same car. That said, now that my child is a teenager and about to go off to college, I'm going to get back into a race car in the next 2 years. And I'm not going to buy a Honda. I'm going to buy a Mazda. I don't want to learn how a new car works. I don't want to do it. I'm 53 years old. I don't want to do that. But there is a contingency program. The parts program's unmatched. There's so much knowledge out there. I can pick up the phone and call 100 different people, and they can tell me what I need to know. And the support they've given, not only for club racing, but also for solo. If you go to Solo Nationals, the presence that Mazda has there, it's so important to this club. And everybody rolls their eyes when another class is, oh gosh, it's another Mazda class. Well, there's a reason. If Honda wanted to do, or any manufacturer, if any manufacturer wanted to do what Mazda's done, it wouldn't be SMX5. It would be CRX, Spec CRX. Right. It would be anything else. But it's because Mazda has put the effort in. They've kind of earned the right to be in the position that they're in because they've put their money where their mouth is. So I always kick people in the shins when they bitch about, oh, not another Mazda. You know, they're also in our FE2 cars. And I mean, they're in so many different areas besides the CRX, or besides the spec cars. That,
right. And not only that, they're in the FE2 car, which doesn't say Mazda in the name at all.
Nope.
And they still support it.
Absolutely.
From a manufacturer perspective, which is amazing.
Absolutely.
Right? So you heard it here first. Not that anyone cares, but I bought myself another race car. And I'm considering campaigning it in SCCA this year, and it is a Honda power plant.
Okay.
And part of me is like, should have gotten me a Mazda because of all the reasons you just described. Right?
So is it a Formula F?
It is not a Formula F. It is a sedan.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm looking forward.
I don't know if it's going to be competitive or not. I've got to work through some issues with it and everything. But point being, I'm a big Honda guy. I like Hondas. I like the screaming. Some people hate the sound. I like the screaming 4-cylinder, 8,000 RPM. I love that. That sounds really cool to me, right? Yeah. I don't dislike a big grumbly V8. That's awesome too. But
sure.
But at the same time, when I bought this car and was thinking about campaigning it, not just having it as a track car, my lizard brain was going, get a Mazda, dude. Get a Mazda for all the reasons we just described. But the siren call was there, right? For sure.
No question. All right, so before we get to talking about NOLA, and then we're going to get back to some more stories, because I got to hear this story behind 3 Fast Guys and Denny. So I got to hear that. We're going to do that in a few minutes. But before we get to NOLA, I just want to thank the folks who are helping make this thing happen. If you look up in the corner, we've got Ray Esports. They are the official sim racing league of Inside the SCCA. I don't know. You probably know Stevie Ray.
I do. Great guy.
Steve, great guy, and I absolutely love working with him and playing his going and doing his sims, because the cool part about Ray Esports, if you go do just regular iRacing, there's a lot of people out there who just will run you over. And a lot of the people in Ray's leagues are SCCA folks who are actually trying to use the sim as a tool, as a training tool, and they treat races just like you're in a real car. For the most part. So, and I do the Formula V League, and I do the Spec Racer Ford Weekend Leagues. Nice. Because I can't do Tuesday nights because I'm podcasting on Tuesday nights. So Ray is the official esports of Inside the SCCA. Our other partner is RaceKeeper. They are the official in-car camera of Inside the SCCA. All the folks there are fantastic, great price point. They work just basically plug and play. You've seen their video on in my very, very slow Honda Fit solo car.
I actually have one.
Yeah.
I actually have one. I've used it on the Nürburgring.
Oh, that is cool. That is cool. So anyway, those guys are great. If you all of the links are in the show notes, and so check them out. And there's also, I believe, we got the podcast with the RaceKeeper guys there and Stevie Ray's podcast. So go check that stuff out. I couldn't do this without their help. Thank you very much to them. And there we have that. All right, going on from there, let's talk about NOLA. It is Wednesday night, Valentine's Day. You're heading out tomorrow. I'm heading out Friday. We've got all of the live stream coverage from Driver's Eye on the SCCA official YouTube channel. But let's talk about this racetrack. I've never been there. I'm presuming that it's been a while for the Super Tour, but the locals down there have raced there pretty regularly, right? Both the Texas and regions and stuff have been there several times, right?
Not to my knowledge. If they have, I haven't been aware of it. I don't believe we've had, outside of like a track night event, I don't know if there's been an SCCA event in 6 years.
Okay.
I might be wrong.
Okay.
I might be wrong on that, but I don't believe there has been.
Well, they're resurrecting this as the resurrection of the Voodoo something or other. So I think there's been at least one race.
No, that was in like 2018. I
okay.
have a shirt.
It's been a long time. It's been a long time.
I think it was 18. Mm-hmm.
So you're going to be in a T2 car, and you're going to be in a Spec Racer Ford. So you've got some time. What are people going to? Let's first talk about the track itself.
Yep,
what do we need to know? Where are the problem spots?
So at a very high level, if you haven't been to NOLA before, the thing you're going to notice when you drive in first, you're going to hear me say this, it's Katrina reclamation land. And you're going to realize when you get there, oh yeah, that's absolutely what this is. They have a little building down in turn 16, kind of at the pit end area, that you can walk up onto the balcony on the second floor and see every single inch of the track, except for one part that's only hidden by like the start tower.
Okay.
It's flat as flat can be. It's like Sebring flat. Okay.
Right.
So my experience is I'm a big fan of elevation. Love me some elevation tracks. I think I've driven 45 or 48 tracks in North America, and with the exception of Sebring, all my favorite tracks are elevation tracks. That being said, Of the flat tracks, NOLA is a very interesting track. It is very technical. Okay, there are some technically challenging areas. There are some areas that you will have to decide as a driver, how do I want to take this corner? And there are not a whole lot of corners on the tracks that we drive that have 2 or 3 different ways that you can drive the corner, depending upon gearing, race. Am I racing? Am I qualifying? How do I want to set the car up for the next corner, and a give and take, and how this corner connects to the next series of corners? NOLA absolutely has some of that. It's got a little bit of everything if you eliminate topography. It has no topography. Okay. Now, when we were there last, and excuse me, from all the reports I've heard over the following years up through the early 2020s, let's say, it got extremely bumpy. Again, Katrina reclamation land.
Sure.
And I mean, I live in Texas. We've seen COTA. They spent $1 billion on COTA, and it got bumpy, right? So this happens to racetracks down here in the South, especially. So it got real bumpy. I know the entrance to turn 1 was like a washboard. I have heard somewhat substantiated rumors that they have repaved parts of the track. Okay. I will check with me on Friday morning and I'll let you know. But I'm hearing they've repaved some of the really bumpy spots. But the things that, as it goes from a racing perspective, here's what I remember distinctly about NOLA. If you are in a class that you are running very similar lap times with the people around you, anything that has a spec in the name, right, or a formula in the name, right, is if you're 3, 4, 5 seconds adrift or ahead of the person behind you in your class, what I'm about to say isn't going to be as relevant. But if you are in a class where times are very similar, you're going to find that this is a very difficult track to pass at. Okay. There's one big passing zone going into turn 1. There are other passing zones, but they are challenging. And because when I say a passing zone is challenging, what I mean by that is it requires collaboration. The passer and the passee both have to be involved in the pass. You can get by somebody in turn 1 and they're just going to like it. If you're going to get somebody in a couple of the other corners, it's going to have to be collaborative. And that actually brings what I think is the most important point, the most dangerous spot on the track that people don't realize, and it's turn 3. Okay. So you go solid on the front straightaway. Turn 1 is a fast right-hander. Turn 2 is a left-hander that I think in most cars in the dry it's going to be flat out. It's just a kink on the exit of turn 1. That takes you into turn 3. Turn 3 has an extremely wide, and again, I'm remembering this from 6 years ago and a little bit of video that I watched a few weeks back. But unfortunately, I have the battle scars for which I'm speaking of this story. Close classes. So the fact that the track is challenging to pass at, like every track is challenging to pass at, it drives a sense of urgency to the driver. If you feel like you're faster than that guy in front of you, or you feel like you belong 2 spots up, you start looking for a place to pass. Rather than really planning ahead, you're just looking for a place to pass. And that quite often ends in tears. Yeah. And the biggest danger area I've seen is actually turn 3. And what happens is turn 3 has a huge wide opening. It's an increasing radius corner that's very tight on entry. So the fastest line generally is to go pretty deep into the corner, carry as much VMIN minimum speed at the apex down to the apex so that you can roll all the way out of the corner and then come back over, set up for turn 4 drivers left. Sure. With that, and that's normally, it's also very gearing dependent. That's most cars, it's going to be a 3rd gear type of methodology, right? You're going to be able to roll 3rd gear at 55, I don't know, I'm guessing miles an hour through the corner. The problem with that is the guy behind you who thinks he's faster than you, that's been chasing you for 3 laps, and he can't find a way behind you, he's going to see a big braking zone, 100 and some miles an hour down to 50 miles an hour, and he's going to see a huge wide open entrance into this corner. Right. If you are driving the corner on a like you're qualifying, you will stay driver's right, very wide, roll down to the apex, and more than likely that gentleman or lady behind you is going to bury the car off with very, very little presentation. The vortex of danger is huge. The VOD is massive going into that corner, and I have seen it end in tears many, many, many times. So that was the long-winded version of me saying the following. When you go into turn 3, you need to make a decision. Do I want to roll 3rd gear on a big wide radius and try to get every single 10th out of the corner? Or do I want to go ahead and get down into the corner earlier, turn in earlier, maybe drop the car down to 2nd gear? And I don't have to drive defensive, but I can drive a conservative line into the corner. And what that's going to do is it's going to eliminate me from getting literally dive bombed from 3 car lengths back. Because what I see happen there a lot is not only do people attempt a long distance pass, which is kind of what we call a dive bomb, but they don't present first. There's very little presentation because it's not a lengthy straightaway leading up to the corner. So number 1 on Denny's list of things to remember is decide how you're going to drive turn 3 and adjust it for traffic, because you can get taken out in turn 3 pretty easily because it is a passing zone. But I recommend if you're going to pass somebody that you present and execute efficiently. Make sense? So that's turn 3. Right. Okay. The next one I think that's important is going to be the 5-6 complex. So, which are fast, they're fast right-handers. You go through 3, 4, which is these hard switchbacks. 5 is normally a tap of the brake, roll through as quick as you can. When you roll up to 6, 6 is the right-hander that takes you onto the back straightaway and into the S's. Okay. Apparently, Brian has headed off into the S's now, which is perfectly fine. He's already figured it out. He's apexed 6 perfectly, and he's lining up to head down the straightaway. So as we head into the S's, you want to roll as much speed as you can through turn 6. The problem with turn 6, there's no, as I recall, there are no visible markers, like nothing. It's basically like a Walmart parking lot heading into turn 6. That makes sense, right? So you sail into turn 6. What you need to do is figure out where your car needs to be turned in, probably tap the brakes, put it on the nose, and just go. But 6 is a super, super important spot on the track. It's very difficult to do consistently the same way